I'm going to try and build on what Tim has been talking to us and look at how we care in practice and in the light of the gospel. When my wife, Shoko, start off with our story, a bit of our story. When my wife, Shoko, was diagnosed with Alzheimer's 10 years ago, we had no clue about what lay ahead. We really didn't have any idea. But a few years later, when the disease actually took over our lives, we learned the hard way. We went through a lot of discouragement and pressure, and Shoko's personality changed, and she lost her capacity in several areas of life. And I realized that many people were going through similar situations, and later when I was able to tell some of our story in my book and hoping it might be helpful. So, yes, I want to share a bit more about our story now. When did the dementia start? About perhaps March 2011, so 11 years ago, I became aware that Shoko was beginning to lose her edge. I'm quite sure, but it was things were not quite as they had been. And by October in that year, I could see that something had happened. She'd begun to repeat questions and comments, forgetting what she just said. We consulted our GP, who referred us to the consultant at the memory clinic. Doctor came to give various tests, and he said, looks like Alzheimer's disease. And that was confirmed a few weeks later. She had a scan and further tests in January 2012, so 10 years ago. Alzheimer's, what did that mean? We were not quite sure. In fact, we knew very little, and we just hoped for the best. And in the first year after the diagnosis, life carried on much as normal. Shoko could still carry on day-to-day activities, looking after the house, cooking, sewing, writing letters, cycling here and there, looking after our granddaughter. But she lacked an overall framework. What day of the week is it today? And if I said Sunday or Monday, she knew what activities were connected with that day. But she could never remember that Monday night was the night to put the rubbish out for collection. And always by Saturday evening, she wanted to put it out. I found this very irritating. Why couldn't she remember? At the same time, I did begin to realize what an extraordinary thing memory is. When you start the morning not knowing what day it is, not remembering what happened yesterday, not quite sure what's going to happen next, well, each day is a succession of new experiences. Shoko's memory wasn't very good, as I've said, but it didn't seem to be getting worse. But something else was happening. She began to be convinced that things were missing from the house. So again and then she would count the cushions in the sitting room, the mugs in the kitchen hanging there, the cutlery and the plates in the cupboards, and we made lists of everything. And she began to move things and hide them so that they wouldn't be taken. I didn't understand what was happening. I tried to reason with her. Look, everything is safe. The house is locked. She wasn't convinced. I didn't connect this strange behavior. I knew it was strange. I didn't connect it with Alzheimer's because I thought that's primarily about memory loss. But of course it isn't, as Tim has reminded us. It includes cognitive, yes, but also emotional, psychological, and other changes. And I didn't realize this, so I was just irritated a lot of the time. And in fact, I was really troubled. And over the next 4 years, we had a steady progression of losing things, not from our house, but from our lives. We reduced our travel. But if we went out, I had to make sure I kept my eyes on Shoko. She could get lost. And she began to find cooking more difficult, how to measure things. One day she looked at her sewing machine and she couldn't work out how to set it up. She'd been doing it for years. She never used it again. And so on. And we didn't know it at the time, but we were going through some of these stages of dementia. And as Tim has told us, the progress is different for different people, but it's helpful to think that there are stages and they're I won't comment on that. We're going through the stages, which we didn't know at the time. And by the end of 2016, things began changed quite sharply. And Shoko was no longer able to initiate her own activities or plan what she would do each day. She couldn't finish things on her own. She stopped playing the piano, often confused about who was in the house. And when the family came to stay at Christmas, as usual, she was puzzled. Who's that in the kitchen? And in short, she couldn't manage her daily life. She needed me to be with her, and she was very dependent on me. Soon she began to have difficulty going to bed and settling to sleep, and suddenly Alzheimer's had begun to bite. And our children noticed the change when they came to visit. And as we grappled with our situation, we found ourselves asking, is this the same person? What has happened to her? And about this time, friends lent us some books that began to show us how we could respond. So how do we respond? That's the crucial question. One of the books that was lent to us by John Zeisel, I'm afraid I don't have a copy, but it's a really good book. It's on the list of books that you'll hopefully get later. I'm Still Here. And Zeisel explained that Alzheimer's is a terminal illness. As Tim said, we can't cure it, but we can treat it. Not necessarily with medicine, though that can be useful, but by the way in which we relate and help to improve the quality of a person's life. His basic thesis was, the person has changed, but she's still there. She's the same, but not the same. But we can choose to have a continuing relationship. And this came like a revelation to us. It fitted our experience exactly. Our daughter, Sarah, had written after one of her visits, I feel sad that my mother isn't as she used to be. And we wanted to go back to that old relationship, to find that old person, but we knew it wouldn't happen. But now we realized we could choose to build a new relationship. Dr. Tom Kitwood, 25 years ago, introduced the concept of person-centered care. He found that dementia doesn't progress in a linear fashion, and it varies from person to person. And one of the most important factors is the quality of care and relationships. So what do persons with dementia need? And his answer was, well, it's the answer to every, love. And he illustrated with the 5 petals that surround it. So individuals need comfort or warmth to remain in one piece when they maybe feel as though they're falling apart. They need to feel attachment when they feel as though they're in a strange place. They need to be included and involved both in care and in life. They need to be occupied with past and current interests. And finally, people with dementia need to have an identity. And the caregivers, we're the ones who have to help to maintain that identity because it often can disappear. So all this means that relationships are vital. And Kitwood was a Christian, and his approach reflected what the Bible tells us, that we're persons made in God's image, and we'll come back to that later. Well, we hadn't read Kitwood at that time, hadn't even heard of him, but we did realize the fundamental importance of relationships, of love and affection. But what did that mean in the context of this very shadowy, unpredictable world of Alzheimer's? Well, 2 pieces of advice that we received, and there are many, many more that could be talked about, but here's one, and it was this: don't say don't. Don't argue. Enter into their world, as Tim was saying, and as we talked about many times in the past. Don't disagree. Instead, distract and divert. So what if Shoko was confused or unpredictable or anxious? What if she found it hard to recognize people or to recognize me? What should I do? Well, that only happened a couple of times, I'm grateful to say. one evening she wasn't very happy because she thought I was pressing her to go to bed. So she said to me quite crossly, "I'll tell my husband when he comes back." "I am your husband," I replied. "You're not my husband," she replied, rather scornfully. I was dismayed, and I tried to persuade her I really was. Look, I'm Robin, I'm your husband. Look at me, look at my clothes. Of course I am your husband. She wasn't convinced. I just didn't know what to do. It was the moment I'd been dreading. She doesn't know me anymore. And I stood there thinking, what could I say next to convince her? And then I remembered the advice: don't disagree, distract and divert. So I went downstairs, opened the front door, rang the bell, came in, shut the door loudly, and I said, "Hello, darling, I'm here." It worked. She stood at the top and says, "Oh, where have you been? I was looking for you." Phew. I was so relieved. And it didn't always work. There were a couple of other times when it didn't work in the sim, but nothing quite like that. So don't disagree, distract and divert. It's very helpful advice. Another piece of advice: your body language is more important than what you say. And our daughter told me many times, long before I understood it myself, because our words are actually not the most important part of our communication. And it was true. If the tone of my voice was impatient, or if I hustled Shoko to sit down or get up or let's go out, we've got to go, she found it distressing. Why are you so cross with me? Sometimes she would cry, "Why are you cross with me?" But if I spoke softly or held out an encouraging hand, she gave me such a rewarding smile, much more than I deserved. Maintaining a loving relationship isn't automatic. There's a lot to learn, I can tell you. But it's not a technique, it's just friendliness and warmth. And that's just one side of the story, my maintaining the relationship with her. But the other side was that the part of the brain that has an important effect on emotions is often not affected in the same way as other parts of the brain. Tim will tell you the brain is so complex, and so that part that looks after the emotions is often still strong. And so while thinking may be confused, feelings are still there. And that's so important, actually, when we think of anybody living with any kind of dementia, that the feelings are so strong, so powerful, and they're still there. And Shoko's affection was so strong. We could see it in her relationship with children, the grandchildren when they came, or children in church or at the supermarket. She would see children in the supermarket and start singing to them. They loved it. And I saw it in her affection to me, because we had a carer who came and I would go out and do other things, get a break. When I came back, she would often just stretch out her arms and say, "Oh, I love you so much. I love you so much." It was so moving, so wonderful. So affection is still strong. So in summary, how do we respond to the person living with dementia? And I think we just love and respect, because he is still a person. But that raises another important question. How do we support the caregivers? And caregivers need support so they can continue to love and care. As Tim said earlier, we have to really support ourselves or support the caregivers. And caregiving can be very challenging. This list on the screen there, but they're all true. Even this last couple of weeks, I've been talking to people who are caring for somebody and just going through the same kind of things that are on the screen there. Even that spiritual thought about wake up, God. If you look at Psalm 44, it says, "Wake up, God. What are you doing? Wake up." We often can feel like that. Of course, it is a calling to be a caregiver. And if we follow Jesus, we're called to follow his example, to love and to deny ourselves. And God does give grace for that calling. But we need to think how we can support the caregivers. And I think there's two questions here. For the caregivers, how do we face the challenges, the kind of things I've described? And for the rest of us, how do we support the caregivers? Just some very quick pieces of advice for caregivers. Discover the resources that are available, and that's easier said than done. It's often not joined up. You have medical and social not joined up, and in social care there can be so many different things on offer. You can get confused, and we found that when we discovered in our local council, we had the community dementia nurse working alongside our local council, Phil Parker, and he was just fantastic because he could give us medical care, practical care, relational care. He was accessible, but that's not easy to find. So discover the resources that are available wherever you are. And secondly, build your support team. Tim has talked about this already, and I think it's so important. By that I mean, on the one hand, the professionals, the medical, social carers, and then also our friends, the network of friends and family, our community, because it's not a question of if I need a support team, but when. And this quote here reminds us that recognize right from the beginning that providing care for someone with dementia is not a one-person job. That's so true. And friends are so important, both for the person living with dementia and for caregivers. Not always easy though. Friends come and the person doesn't recognize them, or if they recognize them, they may not engage that particular day. Shoko's sister came from Japan to see her. She said, I found it very hard, she said. Shoko recognized her, but conversation wasn't easy. But the good thing was they started singing together familiar Japanese songs, and that broke all the boundaries. So singing was always one of the best ways to relate with her. Music is very powerful. So friends have a very important role, and friends don't forget, they don't stay away, they don't give up. And then for all of us, don't be afraid. Alzheimer's, dementia can be very mysterious and fearsome, but we learn not to be afraid. Don't be afraid, but do be intentional. We need to take the initiative and support and help those who are caring for somebody else. And I've just listed here some of the kind of things that we can do, many things. And I think the point here is there are two sides. On the one hand, if you're caring for somebody, as Tim rightly said, ask for help and receive help. Take it if it comes. Don't think, oh, I don't need anything. But if we're supporting other people, we need to take the initiative as well. So both ways we have to be proactive. Let me conclude with, they'll all come on the screen. Okay, I've got 5 points here. You've got them all there, so they're all in front of you. I'll just go through them quite quickly because these are the things that kept us going. Because caring for somebody with Alzheimer's or any kind of dementia is very demanding, as I've said. And whenever I think about it, when I talk about it, I realize again and again how many mistakes I made. How many mistakes I made in looking after Shoko. How many things I got wrong. I got irritated. I did disagree, etc., etc. It is difficult. But I was very privileged that I met our vicar, Robin Weeks, met me once every 3 weeks, and we had an hour together in which he has listened patiently, without any criticism, and also reminded me of some truths from the gospel. And I want to share just briefly some ways in which that impacted me, and 5 truths which made a difference to me. This is, of course, a very personal account. The first is this: we have a Heavenly Father who's both loving and powerful. The Lord's Prayer begins, "Our Father in heaven." And there we have it, the 2 sides, a loving and dependable Father who's also all-powerful. Whatever happens is under his control, even when we don't understand how. And I can remember some early days where I literally didn't want to get out of bed in the morning. I was so confused about what was happening, so disturbed. And I just lay there and said, "Father." And I was putting it into my Heavenly Father's hands. Secondly, we're persons made in God's image, loved by God. We're unique. And that's what makes me me and gives me my identity. We talked about Tom Kitwood and the person-centered care. But what happens when the person seems to be disappearing? And we felt in our family a very sense of bereavement very early on. When our son Jonathan came to visit, he told us that he said goodbye in his heart every time. His mother that he knew was disappearing. Now, she never completely lost her identity, and though she was often very confused, she was always affectionate, as I've described. I'm so grateful for that. But some do seem to lose it completely, and also it appears as if they're locked inside themselves, and we're tempted to feel there's no longer anybody there. But the gospel tells us we can go on believing. The person is still there, still loved by God, still remembered by God. One of the books that I found very helpful is this, Dementia, Living in the Memories of God. And he very powerfully shows how we're not forgotten. We're not forgotten. Then we have hope because our relationship with God continues. About 6 weeks before Shoko died, when she was in good health, I had a dream in which I saw these words written by her. It said, "When I'm gone, tell all my friends I've gone to be with Jesus as he promised. So don't cry for me. Read John 14. It was so unusual to have that dream. I wrote it down as soon as I woke up. Because in John 14, Jesus promised his followers that he would take them to be with him. What an amazing hope. Then, fourthly, when we suffer, God is with us. Suffering is such a huge topic, I can't even begin to even talk about it now. And the experience of dementia brings a lot of suffering, or can bring suffering. And why is a question that we often ask, why? But we never find the answer to that. Perhaps who is a better question. Who is with us when we suffer? Is anybody with us? And the gospel says we're not alone because God is with us. When Jesus came into the world, it meant that God came right down to our level and suffered along with us. And then finally, we're part of a community of love, friendship, and support. 9:30 on Sunday morning, going to church was a highlight of the week for Shoko. I think towards the end she didn't understand very much. We don't know. But she engaged with what was going on. People welcomed her with smiles. She knew she was with friends. And we experienced love, concern, and friendship. And that was so, so important for us. It was not only church, of course. Other networks and many groups can give this too. So whatever network you're part of, that's great and very important. But as a church, we're uniquely placed to love and support those with dementia and their caregivers, because we believe the truths that I've just spoken about. And we can go on hoping and loving and relating. I'll just conclude the very last word with what the Bible says: perfect love casts out fear. If we love the other person, we won't be afraid and they won't be alone. So we go on loving and we go on relating right to the end, whatever that might be. I'm going to stop there.